On this episode of History Hunters, we're off to visit the graves of some formerly very important people and the legendary singer Tiny Tim, who are at rest in the Minneapolis Lakewood Cemetery.
Hi, so welcome to this episode of History Hunters. We are in Minneapolis, Minnesota, here in Lakewood Cemetery, and we're here to visit some historical persons, including the Vice President of the United States, Hubert Humphrey, who was circumvented Faines Johnson. It's a very windy day, and I didn't expect this kind of weather today. It started out sunny, and the wind is sure kicked up. But we're going to visit the grave of the Vice President of the United States first.
Well, I had some microphone issues here, and the wind was creating such a tremendous muffle that I decided to do a voiceover here, but this is the grave of Hubert Humphrey. Nice wall on the back. The graves are actually up front, as you can see here. I found the grave of Hubert H. Humphrey, 1911 to 1978. He was stricken with cancer during the Jimmy Carter administration. And next to him is Muriel Humphrey Brown. She remarried after Hubert died. She died in 1998 and was also a U.S. Senator from the state of Minnesota. And on the back wall, we have his signature. And I think it's pretty cool that there's a quote of his that's engraved here on his marker. It says, "I have enjoyed my life, its disappointments outweighed by its pleasures. I have loved my country in a way that some people consider sentimental and out of style. I still do, and I remain an optimist with joy, without apology, about this country and about the American experiment in democracy." And then the wall has a number of different emblems. And of course, there's an emblem here, the city of Minneapolis, because he was elected the mayor. He served from 1945 to 1948. He ran for U.S. Senate. He served in that office from 1949 to 1964. During his service in the U.S. Senate, he was one of the instrumental leaders of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Of course, he was tapped by Lyndon Johnson to serve as his vice president, so hence there is the Vice President of the United States symbol here as well. Hubert Humphrey was the 38th Vice President of the United States from 1965 to 1969. In March of 1968, when Johnson made his surprise announcement that he wasn't going to seek re-election, Humphrey decided he wanted to run.
So I call you forth. I call forth that basic goodness that is there. I call you to risk the hard path of greatness. And I say to America, put aside recrimination and dissension. Turn away from violence and hatred. Believe in what America can do, and believe in what America can be. And with the help of that vast, unfrightened, dedicated, faithful majority of Americans, I say to this great convention tonight and to this great nation of ours, I am ready to lead our country.
In the general election, he nearly matched Nixon's tally in the popular vote, but he lost the electoral vote by a wide margin. After his defeat, he returned to the Senate and served from 1971 to his death in 1978. He ran for president again, and in the 1972 Democrat primaries, lost to George McGovern.
I feel a personal connection to him because he was one of the first people that I wrote to, first public officials that I wrote to when I became an autograph collector back in 1972 and 1973. In March of 1973, he wrote me a letter. He signed the card that I sent. He sent me a signed photo. And then I got to attend the inauguration of President Jimmy Carter, and I spotted him from where I was in the crowd. He was sick at the time. He had one of those Russian fur hats on. I forget what they call them. But he was there. I picked him out. I saw his wife, Muriel, from where I was standing out in the sea of humanity. He fought cancer for a number of months. He got very ill. And then when he passed away, I remember taping on radio. I was a geeky kid. Taped the narrative of his passing and how they recounted his life. So I never thought I'd actually be here at his grave looking at this granite signature on the wall that I have back home in my collection. One of the first politicians that I wrote to was Wendell Anderson. He was governor of Minnesota, and he was the youngest governor of Minnesota when he was elected at the age of 37, and he's buried his cremains are back here behind me. There's these trees that have lost their blossoms, so it almost looks like snow on the grave. And he is right over here, Wendell Anderson, and his wife, Mary Christine McGee. At the height of his popularity, he was on the cover of Time magazine in 1973. But before that, before he got into politics, he was a member of the 1956 Olympic hockey team, which guaranteed a silver medal. As governor, he is remembered for prioritizing education and making poor districts become more even with the advantaged districts. When Walter Mondale became vice president, he gave up his Senate seat, and that was filled by Anderson, who served from 1976 to 1978. When they left Washington, D.C., and practiced law, but sadly he died of Alzheimer's disease at age 83, 2016, and his ashes are buried right here in the cemeteries. So we're going to come up this hill where we finally have some monument headstones. We're going to try to find the grave of Orville Freeman. He was the governor of Minnesota until he was tapped by John F. Kennedy to become Secretary of Agriculture. And I've already spotted him. He's back here, almost to the back. None of these politicians' graves have any markers. Nobody's left pennies or anything on them. Like they've been completely forgotten. Of course, I'm not sure how many people remember politicians. They probably would rather forget them. Here we go. Freeman, Orville Lothrop Freeman, governor of Minnesota, 1955 to 1961, and U.S. Secretary of Agriculture from 61 to 69. So he served under President Kennedy and President Johnson.
Farm prices are a dozen% lower than they were way back in 1951. People don't realize that. As a matter of fact, I made that point to my wife, who has heard me say it a dozen times last evening at dinner. And she said, "You mean to tell me that farm prices are actually 12% lower than they were way back in 1951? And I said, "Why, you know that. I said that 100 times and you've heard it." Well, she said, "I thought you meant relative to other things." And I said, "Relative nothing. These are absolute prices."
Not only was Orville Freeman the only person to be nominated for governor of Minnesota 5 times, but he also helped launch the career of Walter Mondale. Of course, you'll remember Walter Mondale was Jimmy Carter's vice president. Walter Mondale was a U.S. senator from Minnesota, but it was Orville Freeman here who appointed in 1959 Walter F. Mondale as the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. So it basically kickstart his career. Of course, Walter Mondale also tried to run for president years later and was not successful. I think it was in 1984 that he tried to take over the presidency again from Ronald Reagan. The convention was in San Francisco. They nominated Walter F. Mondale. Geraldine Ferraro was his running mate. That ticket went down in flames. All right, so now let's go off and find some more interesting graves here at this Lakewood Memorial Park in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Whoa. I've accidentally found another grave, and I don't know if you can believe this. This is Rudy Perpich's grave. Rudy and Lola, heaven exists wherever love flourishes. Together on earth, they lived in heaven. And I'm not sure of the significance of this memorial, but here you go. Rudy Perpich, 1928 to 1995, governor of Minnesota, twice, it's not consecutive terms, 1977 to 79, 83 to 1991. Honestly, I totally bumped into that one. I had no idea that Governor Perpich was buried here as well. I know we're in a cemetery, but this crypt might make you hungry when I talk about who's here. The Mars family is buried here. The founder of Mars Candy Bars, Mars Chocolate in 1911, buried here, and his son invented the Mars bar. The Milky Way bar was invented also by a gentleman who is buried here as well, the founder of the company.
In 1911, Franklin Mars founded the Mars Candy Factory, and one of the products that he created was the Milky Way candy bar, which is one of the best-selling confections in history. His son Forrest Mars created the Mars bar in 1933 in England by adding a layer of caramel to the Milky Way bar. Mars invented and patented a candy-coated chocolate in 1940 under a partnership with Bruce Murray, a son of a Hershey's chocolate executive, hence the name M&M, which stands for Mars and Murray. After his father's death, he took over Mars Incorporated and merged it with his own company, successfully running it until he retired in 1973. At the time of his death, he was one of the richest people in the United States.
All made famous by chocolate. And the whole family's buried in here. And these iron doors here. There's a little keyhole here. If you had the key, we could go in and look. But it's locked tighter than a drum. Spent a lot of money on this thing, didn't they? Here's the back side of it. There's no way to even peek in the back side. It's always cool to see statuary in a cemetery like this. Forlorn woman. Looks like she's very lonely or sad. So this giant marker here is our key to the Dayton family, which is right in this area right here. The one I specifically want to find is right here. This is George Draper Dayton, 1857 to 1938. In 1902, he established Draper department stores up here in Minneapolis. You might know it today. It turned into the Target Corporation. Target Stores. It's founded by this guy right here. Here's his wife, Emma. I wonder if she shopped a lot in the store. And right here's the son who took over, David Draper Dayton, son of George and Emma Dayton. He lived from 1880 to 1923. There's Daytons all over this plot here. Big family. So again, if you think cemeteries are boring, not really. You just have to do your research. Who had ever thought George Dayton, founder of Target, or what was the beginning of the Target chain? It is probably not the best time of the day to shoot this, but we found the grave of Charles Pillsbury. Now, you may remember that name, Pillsbury Doughboy. And you know what? I bought a Pillsbury Doughboy. I was going to poke him in the stomach and see if he laughed. Now, only those of you who remember the commercials of the Pillsbury Doughboy would remember that. It's funny, when I press on his belly, all he gets is gas. Charles Pillsbury, he started the flower industry here in Minneapolis. He's buried here with members of his family. And specifically, it's this grave right here, Charles A. Pillsbury, 1842 to 1899. He was a businessman who founded and was the namesake for Pillsbury Company. He actually was a native of New Hampshire. He graduated from Dartmouth College in 1863. And in 1869, he moved to Minneapolis and established the C.A. Pillsbury Flour Company with the help of his uncle, who was the future Minnesota Governor John S. Pillsbury. It eventually became one of the largest flour milling enterprises in the world. He sold his controlling interest to the business in 1889, but remained on the board until his death. And we are in the takeoff flight path for the Minneapolis airport. Had no idea that we were that close to it. The Pillsbury product name is now owned by General Mills, but the name lives on as Pillsbury Best Flour and the Pillsbury Doughboy. Here's his wife, Mary, wife of Charles Pillsbury, 1841 to 1902. Charles Pillsbury engraved up there. It's one of the tallest markers here in the cemetery. Here's a bunch of Pillsburys. Donaldson Clark Pillsbury, Mary Addie. Oh, here's the daughter. So one of the daughters lived just a year of Charles Pillsbury. if you come to the other side of the Pillsbury plot, right here is John S. Pillsbury, 1827 to 1901. He was considered the father of the University of Minnesota, and he was the governor of the state of Minnesota. There are Pillsburys all over the place. You can always tell the richest people, they've got the biggest markers. They are the only ones who can afford such things. But they contributed much to the world. I'm just amazed by people who come up with ideas, and they develop them, they work hard, American enterprise, and then they go on to achieve great fame and fortune. So I'm going to come in this mausoleum right here and find the grave of Tiny Tim, the entertainer who was a little bit creepy in the 1960s. He's buried in this mausoleum right here. So we come down to the basement level, and down this way we see this tree, all these gold leaves on it. And you come right down here. There he is, Tiny Tim. Herbert Tiny Tim, 1932 to 1996.
Oh, tiptoe through the window, by the window, that is where I'll be. Come tiptoe through the tulips with me. Oh, tiptoe from the garden, by the garden, on the willow tree. Come tiptoe through the tulips with me. Ladies in flowers will stray, we'll kiss the showers away. And if I kiss you in the garden, in the moonlight, you'll fall in me and tiptoe through the tulips with me.
Actually almost gave up because I knew it was on this side of the building. It was a floor up. You actually have to come down into the, not the basement, but the kind of underneath the ground level. Tiny Tim's buried right there. His name is actually Hubert H. He was known as Tiny Tim. He gained a lot of fame in the 1960s in Laugh-In. He had a really creepy demeanor, if you ask me. Just the way he sang with his very high falsetto. And even to this day, a lot of people are creeped out by him. In fact, I played him for Sarah, and she said, turn it off, turn it off. It was too creepy. Not only did it sound creepy, but it looked creepy coming out of a guy. He actually died while performing that song. It's very tragic. Now, he was also a Christian. He was very religious. And if you can look down here, this way, it says, "A mighty fortress is our God."
Tiny Tim was famous for his bizarre falsetto rendition of Tiptoe Through the Tulips, a 1929 ditty that he listened to as a child on a 78 RPM record. He was born in New York City as the son of a Lebanese father and a Jewish mother. He dropped out of high school and tapped into his obsession of music of the 1890s through the 1930s, which led him to his dream of becoming a singer. He learned to play the guitar and the ukulele and performed professionally in the early 1950s. Corey was a cult performer in the Greenwich Village music scene by the early 1960s, singing under the name of the crippled lad in the Charles Dickens novel A Christmas Carol. Being that he was over 6 foot tall added to the comic aura of this performer. He appeared on Roland and Martin's Laugh-In 1967 and immediately became a smash sensation. His fame crested in 1969, and on December 17th of that year, he married Miss Vicky, his 17-year-old girlfriend, on The Tonight Show. Millions of Americans tuned in to watch the wedding. The couple mostly lived apart, and while the union produced a daughter named Tulip, he and Miss Vicky divorced 8 years later. Tiny Tim was reduced to traveling the country, playing in less than prestigious venues. Newer generations, however, discovered his talents until a heart attack at a ukulele festival in September 1996 set him back. After getting out of the hospital, Tiny Tim resumed his concert schedule, but it proved too much. On November 30th, he suffered yet another heart attack while performing Tiptoe Through the Tulips in Minneapolis and died an hour later. He was 64. So from the crypt right here, we're going to go down here just to show you the unique stained glass here. It looks like it's honoring Christopher Columbus. Look at that. Well, maybe it's not Christopher Columbus. It says the rime of the ancient mariner, Coleridge. Sailing ship, a seagull, and what I thought to be Christopher Columbus. But that's not Queen Isabella. This is one of the nicer mausoleums I've ever been in. Now, unfortunately, there's no other famous people buried in here for us to look at, but I'm sure if I dug a lot deeper, I could probably find it. So we're going to take the elevator back up and check out one more grave. This is our last grave today, over here by this beautiful lake on the west side of the cemetery. That's what you see. It's like a pair of wings almost. It's a memorial to U.S. Senator Paul Wellstone, and his grave is right over here. And boy, look at this. A lot of people have remembered him with rocks. Look at this. Wellstone. Mother and father and grandparents, public servant, U.S. Senator. He was in the United States Senate from 1991 until he was killed in a plane crash near Eveleth, Minnesota in 2002. He was a member of the Democratic Party, a leader of the populist and progressive wings of the party. So if you come back a ways from the boulder, come back a ways, and here's the marker for Paul Wellstone, and then his wife Sheila, who was one of his tireless campaign workers. And their adult daughter also died in that crash. Here's Marcia Wellstone Markison. She was very young, 1969 to 2002. Paul Wellstone was the underdog when he first ran for the U.S. Senate in 1990 against incumbent Senator Rudy Perpich. He won the race narrowly after being outspent 7-1. When time came for his 1996 re-election campaign, Wellstone inspired a grassroots effort that attracted young people and minorities. Boschwitz ran ads accusing Wellstone of becoming embarrassing liberal and calling him Senator Welfare. But the Democrat was re-elected by a wider margin and for a time in 1998 contemplated a run for president, but decided that he didn't have the physical stamina. The 58-year-old senator took nothing for granted in the 2002 election, but his decision to attend a funeral of the father of a fellow lawmaker and not stay in Minneapolis for a debate proved fateful. On October 25, 2002, Wellstone and his wife Sheila and daughter Marcia boarded a Beechcraft King Air A100 en route to northeast Minnesota. The plane went into a stall and crashed into a forest because of pilot error. None of those on board survived. The Wellstone funeral was attended by President Clinton, Vice President Gore, and half the U.S. Senate.
Again, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of History Hunters exploring Lakewood Cemetery in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hope that you enjoyed learning about some of the people who are buried here. I know that we try to do videos nobody else did. I know Days Jordan the Lion was out here. He did Tiny Tim's grave, but he didn't hit the ones that we're hitting today. And I think they're a lot more interesting as well. You know, it's not always just the Hollywood celebrities, but it's the people who started businesses and made candy bars and ran government here in Minnesota and the United States. It's amazing. I'm fascinated by this. Hope that you were too. Please give us a comment. Leave us a comment. Give us a thumbs up as well. Or subscribe to History Hammers. Love to have you as well. Thanks so much.